For years, fans have been asking it, what if Carrie Bradshaw had married Aidan Shaw instead of Big? It sounds like the ultimate what if, but here's the thing. It's not just fan fantasy anymore. The recent HBO Max series And Just Like That brought Aidan back into Carrie's life, and suddenly viewers were forced to confront a question the original show had been dancing around for 6 seasons. What if the guy who loved her unconditionally, who showed up, who wanted to build a real life with her, what if he was actually the one? We're diving into whether Carrie marrying Aidan would have been the happy ending we all deserved, or if it would have been a beautiful disaster waiting to happen. Because here's what's fascinating, the more you examine their relationship, the more you realize the show might have been telling us all along that love and compatibility aren't always the same thing. The first thing we need to understand is who Aidan Shaw actually was, because he wasn't just the good guy. He represented something fundamentally different from every other man in Carrie's world. While Big embodied everything glamorous, unpredictable, and emotionally unavailable that drew Carrie in, Aidan was the complete opposite. He was a furniture designer with dirt under his fingernails, someone who built tangible things with his hands and believed in simple, honest living. He had a dog named Scout that he loved fiercely, a moral compass that actually pointed in a consistent direction, and he seemed genuinely uninterested in playing the games that defined Carrie's social circles. His apartment was warm and lived in, his life had structure, and he knew what he wanted. When Carrie met him, she was at a breaking point with Big, tired of the uncertainty, exhausted by the emotional roller coaster, desperate for someone who could just choose her without ambiguity. And Aidan represented exactly that. He was stability that didn't feel suffocating, passion that didn't come with drama or secrets. He was, by every conventional measure, the good guy. But the show understood something crucial about Carrie Bradshaw that made his goodness complicated. She wasn't always looking for good. Sometimes she was drawn to complicated, to unstable, to the thrill of not knowing where she stood. And that tension is where their entire story lives. What made their first relationship work, at least initially, was that Carrie actually changed for him in meaningful ways. She quit smoking, which was huge. It represented her willingness to transform herself for someone she cared about. She invested in the relationship with a kind of presence she rarely showed anyone else. And there was this ease between them that felt genuinely different from her dynamic with Big. She wasn't waiting by the phone, analyzing every text, wondering if he was thinking about her. With Aidan, the anxiety was gone. He made his feelings crystal clear. He showed up. He made it obvious that he wanted her, and he didn't feel the need to make it a guessing game or keep her off balance to maintain power in the relationship. The romance was passionate and playful. The conversations felt real and unguarded, and there was something almost peaceful about being with someone who had his life figured out and was secure enough to share it with her. Carrie felt safe with him, and in that safety she allowed herself to be vulnerable with him in ways she rarely was with anyone else. She talked about things that mattered. She let him see parts of her that were usually hidden behind wit and sarcasm. That vulnerability was genuine. Their connection was real and deep. But real doesn't always mean forever, and that's where things started to crack. The problem wasn't that Aidan wasn't good enough, or that he didn't love her enough. The problem was that Carrie Bradshaw couldn't stop being Carrie Bradshaw, and more importantly, she wasn't sure she wanted to. When Big reappeared in her life, something fundamentally shifted inside her. It's like a switch flipped. She cheated on Aidan, which was betrayal enough. But what made it worse was that it revealed something deeper. She brought Big back into their relationship repeatedly. Even after confessing and seemingly recommitting to Aidan, she took his calls. She met him at hotels. She made choices that proved over and over again that Big occupied a part of her heart that Aidan never could touch. What's so telling about their dynamic isn't just the affair itself, it's the pattern that emerged afterward. Aidan forgave her the first time, which speaks volumes about how much he loved her and how badly he wanted their relationship to work. But his willingness to forgive so completely set a dangerous precedent. He was willing to swallow his own pain and doubt to keep her, and Carrie, whether consciously or not, started to resent him for it. Sometimes forgiveness that comes too easily starts to feel like weakness to the person being forgiven, and Carrie had never been attracted to weakness. She was drawn to strength, to people who would demand something from her, who wouldn't simply absorb whatever she threw at them. They did get a second chance, and it was genuinely compelling to watch. After the Bar Scout opening, there was real rekindling between them. The passion came roaring back, and there was this sense that maybe they'd learned something from their mistakes. Aidan proposed with that absolutely stunning diamond ring, and for a moment it seemed like the show might actually be heading toward a fairy tale ending for them. For a moment it looked like they might actually make it work this time. But here's the detail that haunts their entire second storyline. Carrie wore that engagement ring on a chain around her neck instead of on her finger. It's such a small, seemingly insignificant detail, but it's actually everything. She couldn't fully commit to wearing it the way an engaged woman traditionally would. She couldn't let the world see it as a public declaration of her future. She couldn't make it visible in the way that marriage requires visibility. She was still holding part of herself back, still keeping an escape route, still protecting some core part of herself from the kind of surrender that marriage demands. It was like she was keeping the ring hidden just in case she needed to take it off without anyone noticing. And sure enough, when they went to the fountain, that romantic, iconic place where so many pivotal New York moments happen in the series, it all fell apart again. Aidan finally accepted what he'd probably known deep down all along. He couldn't be the one for her no matter how much he wanted to be. He couldn't compete with Big. He couldn't be unpredictable enough, complicated enough, unreliable enough to keep her interested long term. The reason their relationship ultimately couldn't survive isn't actually as complicated as it might seem when you strip away all the emotion and drama and look at it analytically. They loved each other. That part was never really in question. You can see it in their scenes together, in the way they looked at each other, in the genuine care they had when things were good. But love alone doesn't make a marriage work, and it definitely doesn't make a marriage work if you're fundamentally incompatible about how you want to live your life and what you want from the future. Aidan wanted roots in a way that was non-negotiable. He wanted a country house, a traditional family structure, a life that slowed down and became about building something permanent and stable. He wanted to know where he'd be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Carrie, by contrast, wanted the opposite. She wanted New York, the constant motion, the spontaneity, her calm, her independence, her freedom to be her constantly evolving, ever-changing self. She didn't want to settle down. She wanted to stay engaged with the world and all its possibilities. These weren't small, surface-level differences that couples could negotiate their way through. These were fundamental life philosophies that were almost impossible to reconcile. The country cabin scenes perfectly illustrated this divide. Aidan was genuinely happy there, surrounded by nature and simplicity, while Carrie was essentially dying there, feeling trapped and disconnected from herself. And that devastating Apple Store moment, when Aidan was with Natasha and they ran into him by accident, and Carrie realized that he'd actually moved on to someone who could give him what he needed, that was the final, irrefutable proof that they existed in completely different worlds with completely different dreams. So what if Carrie had married him anyway? What if she'd decided that love was enough and that they could make it work despite their differences? There are really two possible versions of that story, and honestly, neither of them ends happily in a traditional sense. In the first scenario, Carrie genuinely commits. She makes the choice to become the woman Aidan always wanted her to be. Maybe she moves to the country with him, or at least agrees to a life that's divided between the city and the suburbs. Maybe she tones down her social life, focuses more intently on her writing from a quieter place, and builds that family he wanted so desperately. They have kids, they get a dog, they settle into a life that looks like what Aidan envisioned. But here's what that costs her. It costs her New York in the way she needed it. It costs her the relentless stimulation of city life, the constant movement, the possibility that anything could happen on any given day. It costs her the version of herself that was born in those city streets. Carrie without the city, without the constant hustle and stimulation and endless possibility, without her calm and her friends, and the energy of Manhattan pulsing through her veins, isn't really Carrie anymore. That's not a happy ending. That's a slow transformation into someone else. That's erasure dressed up as compromise and maturity. In the second scenario, Aidan stays in the city. He gives up his dream of that country life and that traditional future. He compromises on everything he wanted for himself because he loves her and he believes they can make it work. They find middle ground. They stay in New York, they build a life together, they try to balance her need for independence with his need for some kind of stability. But then you're left with an uncomfortable question. How long before resentment creeps in? How long before Aidan starts to realize that he sacrificed his entire vision of his future? The house, the family, the quiet life he'd always dreamed of, and it's never going to happen. How long before he starts to resent the life they're living instead of the life they could have had? And how long before Carrie feels guilty about that sacrifice? How long before she starts to feel responsible for his unhappiness, even though she never asked him to give up everything? Marriage built on one person's fundamental compromise is just a slower ending with a longer buildup of resentment. Both paths lead somewhere sad. What people sometimes miss about the Big and Carrie endgame is that it wasn't about Big being perfect or the better person. Big absolutely wasn't perfect. He was emotionally unavailable in ways that hurt Carrie deeply. He was commitment phobic and made terrible choices and put her through years of uncertainty and heartbreak. But here's the crucial thing that people overlook. He understood her on a fundamental level. Big got why Carrie needed New York the way she did. He understood why she needed her independence and her career and her friends and her constant evolution. He never asked her to be small or quiet or traditional. He matched her wavelength. They were both guarded, both complicated, both resistant to conventional happiness, both a little bit selfish and a little bit afraid, and crucially, they both grew and changed throughout their relationship. Big eventually showed up and made the choice to commit to her. Really commit, not halfway but fully. And Carrie eventually softened enough to let him in, to trust him, to believe that she could have both him and the life she wanted. That's not to say he was the objectively right choice. Relationships are too messy and complex for that kind of ranking, but he was the aligned choice. He was the person whose life vision could actually exist alongside hers without one of them having to disappear. The real reason fans keep debating whether Carrie should have married Aidan is because SATC left so much room for interpretation about what happy actually looks like and what matters most in a relationship. If you believe that happiness comes from being with someone steady and reliable who is completely devoted to you, someone who will show up and be present and give you their whole heart without hesitation, then yeah, Aidan was the answer. If you believe that happiness comes from being with someone who gets your deepest self and doesn't ask you to change or compromise who you are, then Big made more sense. There's no objectively right answer, and that's precisely what makes it such a perfect thought experiment. Carrie's journey with both men taught us something genuinely important. Sometimes the right person at the wrong time isn't the same as the wrong person at the right time. Sometimes love isn't enough if you're trying to build two fundamentally different lives. Sometimes the ending that feels most romantic and noble in the moment, the good guy who wants everything you can't give him, ends up being the one that would have broken both of your hearts in the long run. What if she married Aidan? Maybe she would have been happy in some version of that life, but she also wouldn't have been Carrie, at least not the Carrie that both she and the audience loved. And maybe that's the real answer to this question.